Inside a crowded airplane before takeoff, tensions rise when a wealthy father makes a humiliating demand of a black woman passenger. The cabin fills with whispers, judgment, and unspoken stares. But her quiet dignity and one powerful reply shift the balance, leaving the atmosphere charged with suspense. "We don't want her sitting here. Move her. Now." The words cut through the cabin air like a blade, sharp and entitled. Heads turned, instantly toward the source. A broad-shouldered man in an expensive grey blazer standing over row 14. His voice carried the kind of arrogance that assumed everyone else would bend. The airplane smelled faintly of recycled air and cheap coffee. Passengers were still settling in, sliding bags into overhead bins, fastening belts and adjusting the tiny vents above their heads. But now the whole section had fallen still, hushed, waiting. The father's hand rested firmly on the shoulder of his son, no older than 9. The boy clutched a brand-new iPad, his eyes wide with confusion, but his father's scowl didn't soften. "My child can't sit next to her," the man declared, jerking his chin toward the window seat. "Her." The woman sitting there turned slowly, revealing herself fully to the crowd's gaze. She was black, mid-30s, dressed simply in a navy blouse and pressed slacks. A leather-bound book rested on her lap. Her hair was neatly tied back, and a calm poise framed her face. She blinked once, taking in the man's words. The sting of humiliation spread across the row like static, felt not only by her, but by those watching. 2 college students across. The aisle lowered their earbuds. A couple in business suits froze mid-conversation. Somewhere a baby cried faintly, but even that seemed quieter than usual. The flight attendant, a young blonde woman with a polished smile, hurried down the aisle. "Sir, please lower your voice. What seems to be the problem?" "This seat is not acceptable," the father snapped. He jabbed a finger toward the woman at the window. "Move her somewhere else. My son should not have to sit beside that." The insult hung in the air, unspoken yet understood. A ripple of discomfort spread across the cabin. Some passengers stared at their tray tables, unwilling to engage. Others stared at the man, eyes narrowed. Silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the hum of the aircraft systems. The woman in the window seat did not move. She did not shrink back or rush to defend herself. Instead, she closed her book slowly, placing a ribbon marker between the pages. The gesture was quiet, deliberate, symbolic, a refusal to let arrogance dictate her peace. Her eyes lifted to the man. Calm, steady. The flight attendant looked nervous, caught between duty and decency. "Sir, all seats are assigned. If you'd like to request a different arrangement, I can—" "No," the man interrupted. "I'm not asking. I'm telling. Either move her or move us, but my boy doesn't sit here." His voice rose, demanding authority he assumed he owned. For a moment, no one breathed. The boy shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "Dad." But the father ignored him. The woman finally spoke, her voice low but firm, carrying an unexpected weight. "This is my seat. I won't be moving." It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but the stillness that followed was different now. It carried power. The man's jaw clenched. "Excuse me?" She tilted her head slightly, eyes unwavering. "You heard me." Gasps whispered through the row. The college students exchanged looks, impressed. A flight attendant from the front cabin peeked back, sensing tension. The father straightened, puffing up as though challenged. "Do you know who I am?" The woman's lips curved into the faintest smile. She picked up her book again, tapped. The cover once with her finger, then met his glare. "I don't," she said simply, "and it doesn't matter." Her words landed like a gavel, reverberating in the charged silence. The boy tugged on his father's sleeve again, whispering, "Dad, please, and it's fine. But the father wasn't finished. His pride burned too brightly to retreat. "You will regret this attitude," he hissed, lowering his voice now but not enough to hide the venom. The woman leaned forward slightly, enough for him to hear her clearly. Her eyes were steady, her tone almost gentle, yet every syllable carried a blade's edge. "Better men than you," she said, "have tried to move me." The father flinched. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't dramatic. It was delivered with the kind of calm certainty that cut deeper than rage ever could. The flight attendant froze, caught between de-escalation training and the magnetic pull of those words. Around them, passengers stirred, whispering. Some smiled. Faintly, others nodded in silent agreement. And then a pause. The woman leaned back, opened her book once more, and flipped to her marked page. She did not look at him again. Her message was clear. His attempt at control was over, but the father wasn't ready to accept defeat. His pride smoldered, looking for a way to strike back. And just as he opened his mouth, the intercom chimed. "Overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're preparing for departure." The timing was cruel to him, but perfect to everyone else. The father stood there, humiliated but refusing to sit. The boy stared at his shoes. The woman turned a page in her book, serene as though nothing had happened. And in that moment, the power dynamic had shifted, but none of them knew yet. This was only the beginning. The engines hummed, low and steady, vibrating through the cabin floor. Row after row of passengers tugged at seatbelts and adjusted armrests, but in row 14, the air felt different, thick, charged, almost electric. The father finally sank into his seat, jaw tight, fists clenched against the armrests. He stared, straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the woman sitting by the window. His son squirmed beside him, glancing nervously at both adults as though trapped between two storms. Across the aisle, whispers buzzed. "She didn't even flinch," one college student muttered under his breath. "Yeah. Did you see the look on his face?" the other whispered back. 2 rows ahead, a businessman tilted his head back, pretending to sleep, but his ears strained for every word. A young mother rocked her baby gently, her eyes darting toward row 14 again and again, sympathy etched across her features. The woman remained still. She read her book with quiet dignity, her fingers tracing each line slowly, deliberately. Though she hadn't turned a page in several minutes. She wasn't reading anymore, she was listening to the silence, to the way it pressed against her, to the way it revealed people's choices. Silence had weight. Some used it as a shield, others as a weapon, and in this cabin, silence had chosen sides. The father cleared his throat, loudly, then raised a hand to catch the flight attendant's attention. She approached hesitantly, clipboard tucked to her chest. "Yes, sir?" she asked. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, though every nearby ear strained to catch his words. "Move us. First class. Now." The attendant blinked. "I'm afraid. First class is full, sir. We'll be departing shortly." His lips curled into a bitter smile. "Do you have any idea who I am?" She inhaled, forcing her tone to remain professional. "Sir, all passengers must remain in their assigned seats until the seatbelt sign is off. If there's a possibility to change later, I'll inform you." "That's not good enough." His voice cracked louder this time, drawing attention. Again, "I will not have my child sit here." The woman at the window closed her book. She didn't speak, but her quiet action drew eyes back to her. She placed the book gently on the tray table and folded her hands on top of it, her posture regal despite the cramped space. The boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, can we just fly? Please." The father's jaw tightened. He turned, away from both of them, staring instead at the seatback screen. His reflection glared back faintly, and for the first time he seemed unsettled by it. The flight attendant retreated quickly, her polished smile cracking. She hated the way his entitlement had cornered her, hated the unspoken demand in his tone. She'd worked flights long enough to know how people like him operated. Loud, insistent, always assuming their money or status was a shield against accountability, and yet the woman hadn't raised her voice once. The plane shuddered slightly as it pushed back from the gate. Safety announcements began, but few were listening. The tension in row 14 held them hostage. The woman finally spoke, her words soft enough to be directed at the boy more than the father. "It's a long flight. You'll be more comfortable if you take a deep breath." The boy blinked at her, startled by her kindness. His father snapped, his head toward her, but before he could bark again, the boy actually inhaled, deep, shaky, but calming. He let it out slowly, shoulders lowering. The father saw it, and it infuriated him. She hadn't needed to move. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. Yet she was already winning his son's attention, his respect. It was a war he hadn't realized he was fighting, and he hated that he was losing ground without even understanding the rules. The plane lifted into the sky, engines roaring. As it climbed, the city lights below blurred into a soft glow, fading into the distance. Inside the cabin, the silence thickened. The woman turned her gaze to the window, watching the clouds stretch like endless fields. Her reflection looked back at her. Calm eyes, steady breath. But behind that calm, memories stirred. Moments in boardrooms where her competence had been questioned, dinners where her presence had been ignored, sidewalks where her space had been invaded. This moment was different only because it was public, and the audience could not unsee what had been done. Her dignity was not for the man, it was for them. Row by row, passengers carried the scene in their minds. Some shifted uncomfortably, wishing they had spoken up. Some avoided eye contact, afraid to be pulled in. A few, though, silently admired her strength. The silence told its own story. An hour into the flight, drink service began. The attendant approached row 14 again, her tray rattling slightly in her hands. She offered polite smiles, but her eyes lingered on the woman. A flicker of apology passed between them, wordless yet clear. The father noticed. His pride twisted again. "2 whiskies," he demanded curtly. "Neat." The attendant hesitated. "Sir, I can serve you one at a time," he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Unbelievable. Even here." The woman raised her hand gently. "Water for me, please." The contrast cut him deeper than any insult. Where he demanded, she requested. Where he barked, she spoke with grace, and the silence around them shifted again. Passengers weren't just watching now. They were taking sides. The boy sipped his juice quietly, sneaking glances at the woman beside him. For the first time since boarding, he seemed calm. The father stared out into the aisle, refusing to see it. But deep down, the silence was pressing against him too, heavy, suffocating, because in that silence he was losing. The cabin lights dimmed, casting everything in a soft amber glow. Dinner trays clinked faintly as flight attendants maneuvered. Carts down the aisle, distributing neatly packaged meals with plastic cutlery and lukewarm rolls. Most passengers leaned back, surrendering to the rhythm of the flight. But in row 14, rest was impossible. The father tapped his fingers against the armrest, restless energy betraying the calm mask he struggled to maintain. He sipped his whiskey, too quickly, his throat tightening with each burn. His reflection stared back from the darkened window of the opposite row, older than he wanted to look, angrier than he wanted to admit. Beside him, his son picked at the tray of chicken and rice. He chewed quietly, occasionally sneaking glances toward the woman by the window. She ate slowly, gracefully, pausing often to sip her water. Each movement was precise, deliberate. as though even the smallest action carried weight. Her composure gnawed at him. Every second she remained calm, his own agitation grew louder. He needed control back. "You know," he said suddenly, his voice low but pointed, "people like you always think respect is earned, but it isn't, it's taken." The words were meant for her alone, but the boy heard them too. The woman did not look up from her tray. She set her fork down gently, wiped her lips with the napkin, and then turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable. Calm. She said nothing. That silence, deliberate, piercing, burned him more than 1,000 arguments. "Don't you dare ignore me," he hissed, leaning closer. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in quiet assessment, as though she were studying a puzzle piece that didn't fit. She finally spoke, her voice calm but unyielding. "I'm not ignoring you," she said. "I'm simply refusing to lower myself." The words landed softly, yet they reverberated like thunder. The boy froze, his fork suspended mid-air. Across the aisle, one of the college students shifted, pretending to adjust his earbuds but clearly listening. The father's chest tightened. He forced a laugh, sharp and hollow. "You think you're better than me?" She tilted her head. "No, I know I'm not beneath you." Her restraint was unbearable. He wanted shouting, conflict, chaos, anything to re-establish the upper hand, but she denied him every tool, leaving him thrashing in his own anger. The flight attendant returned, collecting empty trays. She hesitated at row 14, her eyes flicking nervously between them. The woman handed over her tray neatly, thanking the attendant with a small nod. The father shoved his tray forward roughly, sloshing the remains of whiskey onto the plastic. The attendant's hand trembled slightly as she took it, her professional smile faltering. When she walked away, the father exhaled sharply, turning to his son. "Don't you ever let anyone treat you like this," he muttered. The boy looked at him carefully, then at the woman, then back again. His young mind weighed what he was witnessing. Pride versus dignity, noise versus silence. He didn't answer his father. The father leaned back, frustrated. He loosened his tie, his chest rising and falling quickly. But no matter how he shifted in his seat, he couldn't escape the stares. They weren't overt, not anymore. But he could feel them. The sideways glances, the subtle shakes of heads, the quiet judgment seeping into the air. The woman, by contrast, seemed lighter. She opened her book again, flipping the pages slowly. Once she even smiled faintly at a passage, the curve of her lips soft and genuine. The smile infuriated him. He clenched his fists beneath the armrest, nails digging into his palms. He remembered boardrooms where men had bowed to him, dinners where waiters had rushed at his command, deals where his signature alone had shifted fortunes. But here, on this flight, in this row, his authority meant nothing. It was slipping, and everyone could see it. The boy shifted again, finally daring to whisper, "Dad, maybe she's right." The words were so soft, so uncertain, yet they cut deeper than any insult. The father snapped his head toward him, eyes blazing. "What did you say?" The boy shrank back, whispering quickly, "Nothing. I didn't say anything." But it was too late. The father had heard, and so had she. The woman turned her gaze toward the boy, her expression softening. She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. It told him he had been seen, heard, that his small voice mattered. The father felt it, the crack widening. His own son, slipping away from his shadow, gravitating toward her calm light instead. The rest of the flight dragged on in unbearable tension. Movies flickered on seatback screens. Some passengers dozed. The hum of engines filled the silence. But in row 14, the war was silent, invisible, and the father was losing. He closed his eyes. forcing himself to breathe. But behind his eyelids he saw her still, unshaken, unmoved, unbroken, and for the first time in years he realized something terrifying. He wasn't in control anymore. The cabin lights dimmed again after meal service, bathing the rows in a muted glow meant for rest. Curtains were drawn over windows, pillows tucked beneath heads, blankets pulled over laps. The soft hum of engines lulled many into slumber, but in row 14 sleep was a stranger. The father leaned back, arms crossed, his jaw stiff with unspoken rage. His son sat rigidly beside him, earbuds in but no music playing, eyes darting nervously, from his father to the woman by the window. The boy didn't need sound to feel the weight pressing against him. Across the aisle, whispers carried like secret smoke. A businessman murmured to his seatmate, "Unbelievable, the nerve of him." 2 rows back, the college students quietly debated whether they should have spoken up earlier. One wanted to. The other feared being dragged into conflict. The flight attendant lingered in the galley, her hands fidgeting with paper cups. She wanted to intervene, but the airline's unspoken rule loomed large in her mind. Avoid escalation. She hated it, hated the silence it forced her into. Yet even she found herself glancing toward row 14 more often than necessary, guilt tightening in her chest, and through it all, the woman sat steady. Her book rested closed on her lap now. Instead, her eyes traced the patterns of the clouds outside, the faint glow of the moon painting them silver. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, calm, unbothered but thoughtful. She could feel their eyes on her. She always did. Years of walking into boardrooms, classrooms, restaurants, the gaze was familiar, heavy, sometimes hostile, sometimes curious. But this time, it was different. This time, the audience had been forced to witness her refusal to bend. That refusal was reshaping the room. The father felt it too. He shifted in his seat, tugging at his collar. No matter how much he straightened his shoulders or crossed his arms, he couldn't shake the quiet judgment pressing down on him. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice a sharp whisper aimed at his son. "Don't look at her. Don't even think about it. Do you understand?" The boy swallowed hard, nodding slightly, but when his father turned away, his eyes drifted back to her anyway. Softer now, less afraid. The woman noticed. She didn't smile, didn't speak, but she let her presence remain open, like a door gently ajar. The father's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, scowling at the no service icon mocking him from the corner of the screen. He cursed under his breath. "When we land," he muttered to himself, "they'll hear about this, every last one of them." It wasn't clear who they were, the airline, the press, the world at large, but his vow carried the weight of a man grasping at fading power. The whispers continued. "Why doesn't he stop?" someone murmured. "She's handling it better than anyone I've ever seen," another replied. Every word dug deeper. Not into her, she had already chosen peace, but into him. The woman shifted slightly, adjusting her seatbelt. The movement was small, almost ordinary, but it carried grace. She did not fidget. She did not hide. Her stillness was its own kind of defiance. The father couldn't stand it anymore. He leaned toward her again, his voice a harsh whisper. "You think you're teaching me something, don't you?" She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Not teaching," she said. Her tone was calm, almost gentle. "Reminding." The word unsettled him. "Reminding who?" he demanded. "Everyone," she answered simply. Her voice was soft, but it traveled. Passengers nearby heard it. Heads turned again. Silence spread like ripples across a pond. The father felt heat crawl up his neck. He wanted to explode, to roar, to break through her calm. But every instinct screamed that the louder he became, the more he lost. He was trapped, and the whispers grew louder. A young mother cradled her baby and whispered to her husband, "She reminds me of my grandmother." She never raised her voice, either. The college student finally muttered, "She's winning without even trying." The father's hand tightened into a fist. He leaned back hard into his seat, the leather groaning under the force. He stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched, teeth grinding. His son, however, looked at her again. This time longer. His small face softened as though he understood something his father never would. The woman caught his gaze. She gave the faintest nod, just enough to say, "I see you, you're not invisible," and in that moment the boy smiled. It was small, almost hidden, but real. The father didn't notice. His pride consumed him, blind to the fact that the cracks were spreading, not just in the cabin, but in his own home, in his own blood. Hours passed. The plane soared over endless ocean, stars glittering like shattered glass outside. The cabin grew quieter, most passengers drifting into uneasy sleep. But for those awake, Row 14 remained a silent theater, a performance of dignity versus arrogance, a lesson no one had expected to witness when they boarded. And though nothing had been shouted, nothing broken, nothing forced, everyone could feel it. The woman was winning, and the father, despite all his wealth, his voice, his bluster was unraveling. The steady hum of the engines filled the darkness, a low drone that lulled most passengers into uneasy half-sleep. Overhead, lights dotted the cabin like a muted constellation, glowing dimly above scattered heads bowed in exhaustion. Yet Row 14 remained alert, electric, its tension too sharp to dissolve into rest. The father sat rigidly, arms crossed, glaring at the seat back in front of him as though it had insulted him personally. His son had finally slumped against his side, earbuds in, face turned toward the woman by the window. The faint rhythm of his breathing suggested sleep, but even in slumber, his small hand rested closer to her side of the seat than his father's. The woman remained still, eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. But she wasn't asleep. She was listening to the whispers, to the restless shifting, to the way silence carried judgment more effectively than words ever could. Then a sharp sound broke the calm. The father slammed the tray table down hard. The metallic clang startled nearby passengers awake. A businessman blinked groggily, a mother hushed her baby, and the college students across the aisle straightened instantly, eager not to miss a moment. The woman opened her eyes, calm as ever. The father leaned forward, his voice a growl meant only for her. "Do you enjoy this? Sitting there, letting everyone watch me like some kind of animal?" Her gaze met his steadily. "No," she said softly, "but I don't enjoy watching you. Cage yourself either." The words were simple, but they sliced through him. His jaw tightened, his fist clenched. "You think you're clever," he spat. "You think your silence makes you strong, but it makes you weak. Weak people hide behind calm faces." She tilted her head, studying him as though examining a crack in glass. "Strong people don't need to shout," she replied. A ripple moved through the cabin. Passengers leaned closer, pretending not to listen but hanging on every word. The father's face flushed. He wanted to erupt, to shake the cabin with his voice. But he could feel the eyes, not just on her but on him, judging, measuring, condemning. He slammed the tray table shut again, rattling the row. His son stirred, blinking awake. "Dad," he mumbled. "Go back to sleep," the father barked. The boy's eyes darted to the woman, silently apologizing. She met his gaze with a calm nod. Reassuring steady, the whispers returned. "She's not afraid of him. Why is he making such a fool of himself? Unbelievable, I'd complain if I were her." Every whisper chipped away at him, invisible blows he couldn't block. His wealth, his voice, his status, none of it protected him here. The flight? Attendant appeared again, her footsteps hesitant, her expression carefully neutral. She leaned down. "Sir, is everything all right here?" "No," he snapped. "It's not. I want her moved. I don't care how. Find a seat. This is unacceptable." The attendant swallowed, her eyes flicking toward the woman. The calmness radiating from her was almost disarming. She wanted to agree with her, to defend her, but rules bound her. "Sir, there are no other available seats. I need you to lower your voice." "Lower my voice?" he hissed. "Do you know who I am?" The dumb attendant faltered. "Sir, please." The woman finally spoke, her voice cutting cleanly through the air. "She's doing her job. Don't punish her for your discomfort." Her defense of the attendant landed heavier than expected. The young woman's eyes softened in gratitude, her shoulders straightening slightly. For the first time that evening, she felt less alone in the aisle. The father glared, but words failed him. And then, for the first time, another voice rose. From across the aisle, one of the college students cleared his throat. "She's right," he said, his voice uncertain but firm enough to be heard. "You're the one making everyone uncomfortable, not her." The cabin froze. The father turned, sharply, eyes blazing. "What did you say?" The student hesitated, then steadied himself. "I said you're out of line." A low murmur spread across the rows. Some passengers nodded faintly. Others looked down, but the atmosphere had shifted. Silence was cracking. The father leaned back, his face burning. He could feel his authority slipping like sand through clenched fists. He wanted to lash out, but the realization clawed at him. He wasn't just fighting her anymore, he was fighting the room. The woman didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She simply returned to her book, opening it with calm hands as though the moment hadn't shaken her in the slightest. Her dignity was a wall he could not breach. His son shifted again, leaning subtly closer to her side, away from the storm that clung to his father. The boy whispered softly, almost to himself, "She's not weak." The father heard it. His chest tightened. The engines hummed louder, carrying the plane through night skies, but inside the cabin, the storm was human. Pride, dignity, silence, judgment. And though no one said it aloud, everyone felt it. The breaking point had come, and it wasn't hers, it was his. The cabin had changed. Where once there had been only silence, now a hum of low voices threaded the air like a current, impossible to ignore. Passengers who had kept their eyes down now whispered behind cupped hands, their glances darting toward row 14. The father could feel it pressing in on him from every side, the suffocating weight of judgment. His son sat stiffly at his side, chewing, his lip, eyes flicking toward the woman more often than toward him. The boy's small movements betrayed a truth he refused to admit aloud. The respect he once held for his father had begun to fracture. The woman, however, was stillness itself. She turned a page of her book with the same serene calm she had shown since the beginning, her composure a mirror that only reflected his chaos back at him. Every second she remained unshaken. His own fury deepened. Then a voice broke the murmur. "Excuse me," said an older woman a few rows back, her voice clear but trembling with age. "I think we'd all be more comfortable if you stopped shouting at her." The words floated across the cabin like a spark to dry kindling. The father's head whipped around. "What did you just say?" The old woman did not flinch. "I said you're disturbing everyone. Leave her alone." A ripple of approval moved through the cabin. Small nods, a few mumbled, "She's right." The father's skin flushed hot, the sting of public defiance lashing harder than any insult. "You people don't know me," he snapped. "You have no idea who you're talking to." "Doesn't matter who you are," the student from earlier muttered. "You're still wrong." The father's chest heaved. His voice dropped low, threatening. "Watch yourself." But before the threat could land, another voice rose, a soft, almost hesitant one. The flight attendant. "Sir, please," she said, her tone more certain than before. "You're disrupting the cabin. I need you to calm down." Gasps fluttered. The very woman who had once bowed to his authority now stood against it. His fury blazed. You're a servant in a uniform. Don't you dare tell me what to do." The woman by the window finally closed her book, marking her place carefully before lifting her gaze. Her voice cut like a blade through the air. "Respect is not given by uniforms or titles," she said. "It's shown in how you treat people." Her words landed with a weight the cabin seemed to feel collectively. Heads nodded. A murmur of agreement moved through the rows. For the first time, the father looked around and realized something terrifying. He was outnumbered. Everywhere he turned, eyes met him not with admiration or fear, but with quiet disdain. He wasn't the powerful man anymore, not here. In this sealed cabin at 30,000 feet in the air, his power meant nothing, and the whispers kept rising. Why doesn't he just stop? She's handled this better than anyone could. Imagine thinking money makes you better than people. The woman spoke again, softer now, but every word carried. "You've made this seat smaller with your anger, but dignity makes even the narrowest space enough." The boy's eyes widened, as though the words had struck something deep. He leaned back, away from his father, his gaze lingering on her. The father slammed a hand on the armrest. "This is harassment, all of you." His voice shook, no longer with authority but with desperation. The businessman who had been silent until now finally spoke up. "No, sir. This is accountability." The father froze. Accountability. The word reverberated like a bell ringing through the pressurized air. He wanted to fight, to argue, to reclaim control. But the tide had shifted beyond his reach. His arrogance had become spectacle, his power a hollow echo, and in the middle of it all the woman sat, quiet, dignified, unbothered, the eye of the storm she had never created but had endured. The whispers had become voices, and soon he would learn those voices had the power to drown him. The hum of the engines continued, steady and indifferent, as if the sky itself mocked the chaos unfolding below. The father sat stiff, sweat gathering at his collar despite the cool air. His throat burned from shouting, yet silence pressed heavier on him now than noise ever had. Every eye in the cabin seemed turned against him, though none dared stare for too long. It was the sideways glances, the knowing shakes of heads, the muttered agreements that suffocated him most. His son shifted again, putting a small but deliberate space between their shoulders. The boy hugged his backpack to his chest, as though it offered more comfort than his father's presence ever could. The woman by the window remained unchanged, spine straight, hands folded over her closed book, gaze distant, yet sharp. She hadn't raised her voice once, and yet she was winning. He hated her for it. He slammed the armrest with a fist. "All of you," he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "You're nothing without people like me. Do you understand? Nothing." A scoff cut through the air. The businessman, the one who had finally spoken earlier, leaned slightly into the aisle. "Funny," he said dryly. "You seem to be the only one here without any respect left." Laughter, quick and startled, bubbled from somewhere in the back. Not mocking, just a release of tension. But laughter, even faint, was worse than silence. The father's face flushed deep red. He stood suddenly towering in the aisle, forcing passengers nearby to shrink back in alarm. The seatbelt sign glared overhead, but he ignored it. The flight attendant hurried forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Sir, please sit down. It's unsafe." "Unsafe?" he barked, eyes wide, wild. "Unsafe is letting her sit here. Unsafe is allowing this—" His words trailed off as the weight of dozens of stares bore down on him. The woman finally moved. She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees, her calm gaze locking onto his frantic one. Her voice was steady, quiet, but it carried. "You're not afraid of me," she said softly. "You're afraid of what it means that you can't move me." The cabin fell silent. Her words struck deeper than anyone expected. Passengers froze, holding their breath. Even the boy looked at her with wide eyes, as though he'd never heard truth spoken so plainly before. The father trembled, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning in air. His authority, once untouchable, had been stripped bare in a single sentence. "Sit down," the businessman said again, sharper this time. "Yes," another passenger added. "Sit down." More voices joined, not whispers now, but clear and direct. "Sit down. Stop this. You're out of line." The father spun, desperate, searching for an ally. But there were none. Even the college students, once quiet, met his glare with defiance. The older woman who had first spoken up shook her head firmly. "Sir," the flight attendant said once more, her voice steadier now that she wasn't alone, "this is the last time I'm asking." "Sit down." His chest heaved, his fists clenched. He wanted to roar, to command, to make them all bow to him the way people did on the ground. But here, at 30,000 feet, his words were weightless. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered himself back into his seat. The motion felt like defeat, like shackles, and the leather seemed to burn beneath him. The woman leaned back as if nothing had happened, her calm unbroken. Her voice came once more, quiet enough to be intimate, yet sharp enough to cut. "You'll remember this night," she said. "Not because of me, but because you finally saw who you are when no one obeys." The father's breath caught. The boy turned toward her, eyes filled with something new. Admiration, respect, perhaps even longing for a strength his father never showed. The cabin settled, but the air remained charged. Passengers exchanged glances, united not by fear but by a quiet sense of justice. Something larger than the argument had taken shape in that aisle. The walls were closing in, and the father for the first time had nowhere to escape. The hum of the engines had become background music to a play no one wanted to miss. Every soul in the cabin knew it. The balance of power had shifted. The father sat rigid in his seat, face pale but jaw tight, his knuckles white against the armrest. Though he had sat down, it wasn't surrender. Not yet. His pride burned too. Hot, his entitlement too ingrained. He could not, would not accept defeat from her. His son sat beside him silent, his eyes darting between his father and the woman at the window. Each glance revealed more distance. The boy's trust had cracked, and the pieces were falling away with every passing minute. The woman, however, was unchanged. She stared out the window now, her profile calm against the faint glow of the wing. Light outside. There was no triumph in her posture, no smugness. She carried herself as if she had never been touched by his storm. The quiet stretched. Passengers waited. They could feel it. The father wasn't done. Finally, he leaned toward her again, his voice low but sharp. "You think you've won. Them over," he hissed. "But they'll forget you the moment this flight lands. You're nothing, nothing." She didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed on the stars beyond the glass. "If being nothing means not needing to hurt people to feel alive," she said quietly, "then I'll gladly be nothing." The words hung in the air. A few passengers exhaled sharply, as though struck. The father growled, louder now. "Don't you dare lecture me. I built everything I have with my own hands. I don't answer to people like you." This time the businessman's voice cut through. "And yet here you are explaining yourself to her while the rest of us watch. Seems to me you do answer to her." A ripple of chuckles, restrained but undeniable, moved across the cabin. The father shot up again, unable to contain the heat boiling inside him. "Enough! All of you!" His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through anger. "I will not be humiliated by some—" "Sit down!" The older woman's voice snapped like a whip. Stronger now, no tremor this time. He froze. The Chaksha authority in her voice was undeniable. "Sit down," she repeated, firmer. Others joined. "Sit down, sit down." The chant built, not loud but steady, like a tide rising to swallow him whole. His knees weakened under the weight of it. Slowly, reluctantly, he sank back into his seat. The boy shifted again, edging away, his eyes downcast. The shame on his face was louder than any chant. The father's breath came heavy, uneven. He looked around wildly, searching for some sign of support. But the cabin was unified now, against him. The woman finally turned from the window, her gaze resting on him. Her voice was calm, measured. "You came here expecting obedience," she said. "But obedience isn't respect, and tonight you learned the difference." Her words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward into the silence that followed. The passengers absorbed them, some with nods, some with quiet murmurs. It wasn't just a lesson for him. It was a reminder to them all. The father sagged back, his fury collapsing into something smaller. Not remorse, not yet, but something close to exhaustion. The woman returned to her stillness, closing her eyes once more. She didn't need to press further. The tide had already turned. All around them, passengers exchanged looks that said what no one dared speak aloud. Dignity had triumphed over arrogance. At 30,000 feet, in a cabin suspended between clouds and darkness, the quiet revolution was complete, and for the father the fall had only just begun. The plane had grown quieter, though the air still thrummed with something unspoken. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was the kind of silence that followed a storm, where everyone knew the sky could split again at any moment. The father sat hunched in his seat, shoulders stiff, eyes darting from face to face. Every glance he met was heavy with disapproval, and each one chipped at his armor. The arrogance that had once draped him like a cloak now clung like a rag, tattered and transparent. His son shifted uneasily beside him. The boy's small hands fiddled with the zipper of his backpack, his gaze fixed on the woman at the window. He didn't speak, but his silence screamed louder than words. The woman, serene as ever, leaned back against her headrest. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady. To anyone watching, it seemed she had drifted into rest, but the truth was in her posture. She wasn't retreating. She was letting the cabin decide what kind of people they wanted to be, and they had decided. It began with a whisper from the student. "She's braver than all of us." Then a murmur from the older woman. "No, she's just what we all should be." The words spread, soft but undeniable, weaving through the rows until the father couldn't escape them. He pressed his palms to his thighs, gripping hard, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. "Stop talking about her," he muttered, barely audible. But the voices grew. Passengers spoke in hushed tones, trading pieces of admiration, fragments of truth. She didn't even raise her voice. She held her ground without insulting him. Grace under fire. That's real strength. Each word was a blade. "Finally," the boy whispered, almost to himself, but loud enough for both his father and the woman to hear. "She's the kind of person I want to be like." The father froze. His chest tightened, as if the pressurized air had turned to stone inside him. He turned slowly toward his son, disbelief etched across his face. The boy avoided his eyes, staring down at his lap, shame painting his small features. The woman opened her eyes, turning her calm gaze to the boy first, then to the man beside him. She spoke gently, her tone more like a teacher than an opponent. "Children see us more clearly than anyone," she said. "They see past the words and to who we really are." The father's throat tightened. He wanted to lash back, to twist her words into something meaningless. But his son's silence anchored the truth, undeniable, inescapable. The businessman leaned into the aisle again, his voice firm but not unkind. "It's over, sir. Stop fighting what everyone already sees." The father's fingers curled into fists, then loosened. His breath came shallow, his gaze dropping to the floor. For the first time since the confrontation began, he looked small. Passengers watched in silence. Some pitied him, others relished the fall, but all understood. This was no longer about a seat on a plane. It was about a man unmasking himself in front of strangers, unable to hide the rot beneath the polish. The woman's voice came again, softer now. "You wanted me to move because you believed you were more deserving. But the only thing you've moved tonight is the respect people once might have given you." The words lingered in the air, sharp and true. The father pressed a hand to his face, covering his eyes. For a moment, the mask slipped completely. Exhaustion, humiliation, and a fear he could no longer conceal. The boy leaned slightly away, not in defiance but in quiet disappointment, as if some thread between them had snapped. The unmasking was complete, and the cabin, suspended high above the sleeping world, bore silent witness to the fall of a man, undone not by violence but by truth. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the final descent into the city. The words were ordinary, routine, but inside the cabin, nothing felt ordinary anymore. An invisible weight lingered, heavier than altitude, pressing down on row 14. The father slumped in his seat, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. His once commanding frame now seemed smaller, shrunken by the silence that had turned against him. No one spoke directly to him, yet every quiet glance, every turned shoulder was a louder rejection than words could ever be. His son sat rigid, hands folded in his lap, eyes locked on the woman by the window. There was no hiding it now. Admiration burned in his young face, mingled with disappointment in the man beside him. The boy's silence was not rebellion. It was judgment. The woman herself remained unshaken. She adjusted her seatbelt calmly, her gaze steady on the darkened window. Beyond the glass, city lights flickered faintly against the horizon, sparkling like fragments of dignity scattered across the night sky. As the plane dipped lower, turbulence rippled through the cabin. A few passengers stirred nervously, but she remained still, her serenity grounding those around her. The boy noticed. Even in fear, she was strength. The father shifted, muttering under his breath. "This isn't over. It can't be over." The woman finally turned her head, meeting his eyes with quiet certainty. "It's over because you ended it yourself," she said. "You thought power was in forcing me out of my seat, but real power is in not needing to move." Her words landed with the precision of truth, and the cabin absorbed them like scripture. A hush followed, not the uneasy silence from before, but one filled with finality. The businessman across the aisle spoke up once more, his tone calm but firm. "She's right. You wanted control. What you lost tonight was respect." The older woman added, her voice resolute, "And respect is the only thing worth carrying." Passengers nodded, murmuring agreement. For the first time in hours, their voices weren't fueled by tension, but by unity. The father's face burned, but the fight had drained from him. He leaned back, eyes hollow, staring at the seat in front of him, as if it held answers he could not find. The mask he had worn for so long, wealth, authority, entitlement, lay shattered on the floor of row 14, pieces no one would bother picking up. The boy whispered then, his voice quiet but piercing. "I don't want to be like you, Dad." The words struck harder than any chant, any rebuke. They cut through years of unspoken loyalty, piercing deeper than his father's pride could withstand. The man's lips parted, but no reply came. His son's eyes were clear, steady, and unreachable. The woman looked at the boy, her expression softening. She didn't speak, but her calm presence spoke enough. A reminder that dignity could be inherited, even if it didn't come from blood. The plane shuddered as it neared the runway. Lights flared against the cabin walls, illuminating weary but resolute faces. The father sat in silence, a prisoner of his own undoing. His power, once so loud, had been stripped away by something quieter, stronger: dignity. The wheels touched down with a jolt, the roar of landing gear echoing like a gavel striking. Judgment had been passed. As the plane slowed, seatbelts clicked. Passengers stirred and bags shifted overhead. Yet row 14 remained frozen in its silent reckoning. The woman gathered her book, slipping it back into her bag with unhurried grace. She stood when the aisle cleared, her posture tall, her presence commanding without a word. Passengers stepped aside for her, not because of fear or status, but out of respect freely given. She turned briefly, meeting the boy's eyes. A faint nod passed between them, a silent exchange of strength and hope. Then she walked down the aisle, leaving behind not just a man undone, but a cabin forever changed. The father did not move. He could not. His son's quiet rejection echoed louder than any storm. And as the last of the passengers filed out, he remained seated, small, broken and alone. The flight had ended, but his descent had only just begun.